By now, you must have heard of Kubacki's strange disappearance and reemergence. His recently published book is all over the place.
And in it, he basically says the disappearance was a hoax.
Yeah, except for his claims that in another reality, he actually died and his spirit, well, it traveled the multiverse.
Welcome to Velarcana. Here we share mysteries that often defy explanation. I research the cases, and my husband tells the stories.
And this one begins on treacherous ice.
I felt like I almost went under the ice. No, I'm not really sure, but I kind of entered this other dimension, and there was this sense of beings of light and this energy shell.
In the early morning hours of Sunday, February 19th, 1978, 24-year-old Steven Kubacki, a student at nearby Hope College, excitedly left his apartment at 646 Church Street, Holland, Michigan, and he headed out for a cross-country skiing adventure. He went alone. The next morning, around 11 a.m., a group of snowmobilers came across skiing gear in a remote area of the Lake Michigan shoreline. The tracks in the snow headed out onto dangerous ice. One of the snowmobilers there rushed to a nearby construction site and called the police.
The skis were side by side facing the lake about 8 inches apart. The ski poles were stuck into the snow, upright on the outside of the skis. A blue backpack was sitting on top of the skis. Inside the backpack were a pair of black, thickly insulated gloves, a brown bag containing lunch, 2 rolled-up plastic bags, one big, one small, a notebook pad with loose sheets of writing paper, some written, and college handout material, also a drawing pad.
The trooper looked up at the set of tracks that left the backpack. They continued into the ice as far as the eye could see, so he followed them, and he discovered that they went out for a couple hundred yards, and then they just abruptly stopped. Had Kubacki fallen through the ice? Well, there was no hole. Could it have frozen over? The state trooper puzzled. One thing he knew for sure, he wasn't about to tempt fate and head out any further, so he turned his attention back to the backpack. Inside, he found a dentist bill. It was dated February 3rd, 1978, and it was addressed to a Mr. Steven Kubacki. Well, officers followed up with a dentist who provided them with Steven's personal information. They called the phone number, but no one answered. So they went out to his apartment on Church Street, but no one was home. Eventually, they located Steven's roommate, a man named James Courtier. He told them that he had not seen Steven since Saturday afternoon, when Steven had told him that he was planning that cross-country skiing adventure. Surely not alone, right? Oh yes, Steven was a thrill-seeker, James told the detectives. He often went out alone, even stayed overnight sometimes. Not only that, but occasionally, whenever the two would go out together, Steven would often leave James on the shore and venture out onto the thin ice, sometimes being gone for hours, as they explored miles and miles of frozen lake. Well, as they talked, the officers began to get that sinking feeling that Steven was either trapped out there somewhere on the ice, or he had already fallen through. Either way, a search and rescue team was put together, and the Coast Guard was called, but they wouldn't be able to get air support to that remote part of the lake until the morning. So Steven's college actually chartered a private plane to help, and it flew out into the setting sun and made several passes as night fell, but it found nothing. By dawn, word had gotten out, and it seemed like everyone knew that Steven was missing, and they all thought the same thing. He had, of course, fallen through the ice. Steven's parents had flown in overnight, and they were among the hundreds of people standing at the lakefront, peering out into the empty ice. The state police and the Coast Guard had choppers in the air, searching countless miles of frozen lake.
For 2 days, seasoned trackers combed every inch of frozen shoreline, every shaded gully, and every pitted hollow. Divers suspended from ropes descended into the fissures in the ice, risking life and limb to probe its murky depths and look for suspicious places where the surface had broken. Teams of dogs hunted for a scent. No one found anything save for that single set of footprints dead-ending in the middle of the lake, which the professionals deemed too treacherous to search on foot.
Hundreds of people worked around the clock until Wednesday afternoon, and with no sign of Steven, the search was finally called off. Nearly everyone assumed that he had just fallen through the ice somewhere out there and drowned. Nearly everyone, that is, except for Steven's father. He never gave up hope. He actually hired a private investigator. And the investigation? Well, it took detectives on a journey that covered everything from the mysterious Michigan Triangle to the possibility that Steven just might have been one of the victims of John Wayne Gacy. I'm going to bet that just about everyone watching right now has already heard of the Bermuda Triangle and all the strange disappearances all through history. But supposedly, and did you know this? There are other mysterious triangles all through the world where unexplainable disappearances have also taken place. And one of them is, of course, the Lake Michigan Triangle. Strange disappearances there date all the way back to 1679. In September of 1679, the sailing ship La Griffon docked at La Grande Bay. It loaded over 10,000 pounds of fur, and then it set sail for Lake Erie. However, it never arrived at its destination, and no shipwreck has ever been found. People have come up with all types of theories over the years, but it was just as if the ship had been plucked out of the water. Ever since then, numerous ships and planes have disappeared within the triangle. Just to name a few, there was the Thomas Hume schooner in 1891. It seemingly vanished with 6 sailors on board. There was the Roosevelt sailing ship in 1921. The interesting thing about that one was the captain, a man named Ed Johnson, got this bad omen just before the ship departed, and he refused to get on board. Well, the ship left without him, and then 17 days later, it was found capsized, and the crew? They were nowhere to be found. Ships and planes have continued to disappear into this triangle. In 1950, Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 2501, carrying 55 passengers, disappeared into the triangle. Their last radio transmission came in just past 11 p.m., and there were no signs of distress. Well, with no further communication, by midnight, radio operators realized that the plane was missing. The next day, the Coast Guard did a search, but no major wreckage was found. Strangely, however, there were smaller pieces, and mainly, and this is grotesque, they were of human body parts, like an ear or a toe. The largest piece found was a human hand. Some people believe that the plane was struck by lightning, causing it to explode in the air. However, none of the debris recovered had any burn marks. Proponents of the triangle theory, of course, have suggested that the plane was a victim of the triangle, maybe even taken by a UFO, citing that 2 police officers in the area saw red lights hovering above the lake for a couple of hours after the plane disappeared. Anyway, with this strange history of disappearances in this area, many people who believe in this triangle lore speculate that maybe Kubacki just might have been one of the triangle's latest victims.
Fast forward to 1978. Steven Kubacki, a student at Hope College located on the southeastern side of Lake Michigan, went missing.
The museum goes on to say that it was assumed that Steven had fallen into the lake, but no broken ice had ever been found.
Search and rescue scoured the region and found no trace of Steven. It was as if he had just vanished into the triangle.
Well, investigators, of course, did not believe that some mysterious force had somehow come up out of the triangle and swallowed up Steven Kubacki whole. And with no cracks in the ice, they turned their search elsewhere. Some of Kubacki's classmates told police that he had had a girlfriend in Germany, and they suggested that maybe he had went there. So police requested flight manifests, but found no record of any Steven Kubacki flying to Germany around that time. At one point, a friend of the family began receiving these bizarre phone calls, and an unknown voice on the other end of the line gave a phone number and said, if you want to get a hold of Steven, call him there. But when police investigated the number, it was disconnected. Well, Steven's mom thought about it. The phone number looked familiar. So she looked through her phone bills, and she found that 6 months earlier, in September of 1977, she had gotten a call from her son from that exact number. She couldn't remember exactly what they talked about, but the phone call lasted for around 15 minutes. It was a Michigan number. Well, police did some digging, and they found out, now, check this out, that John Wayne Gacy had been in Michigan, presumably in that same area in September of 1977. So in February of 1979, 1 year into the investigation, the Michigan State Police contacted the sheriff's office in Chicago, asking them where they might send Steven Kubacki's dental records to see if there was a match with one of Gacy's victims. Unfortunately, this too proved to be a dead end. Then, just 3 months later, around the time that this case was just about starting to turn cold, Steven Kubacki returned with a strange impression of another dimension. On May 5th, 1979, Steven's Aunt June received a telephone call. On the other end of the line, she heard Steven's voice. It was shaky and uncertain. He told her that he was at a gas station, and he gave her the address. Well, about a half an hour later, her station wagon raced into the parking lot. She saw Steven standing outside of the phone booth. He looked bad, not at all like she had remembered him. He was wearing dirty clothes, and he hadn't shaved in a while. And he seemed empty and expressionless. Well, she, of course, jumped out of her car, ran over and then hugged him until he just couldn't breathe. And then the two of them got back into the car and headed toward his father's house. Along the way, she asked all types of questions. Where did you go? What happened to you? Where in the world have you been? To which he had very little answers. Well, they pulled up outside of the house, and the reunion was pretty much how you probably imagine it was. His father was in tears, his mother too. Well, this went on for a while, but after a bit, everything calmed down, and then, of course, his parents hit him with a barrage of questions. Finally, Steven told them that all he had was flashes of memory. He said that it was cold and dark.
I remember leaving my skis and backpack not far from the shore and walking out onto the ice. I was cold and lost my sense of direction. I couldn't find my stuff and I kept walking. I have no memory of anything after that. All I remember is feeling colder than I'd ever been. The next thing I knew, I opened my eyes and found myself lying on my back in a field near Pittsfield.
Later, Steven told the newspaper that when he woke up in that field, he had no idea where he was, and he didn't recognize the backpack that was with him. But with no other clues, he went through it, and he found maps to places that he had never been to, and he got these vague impressions of hitchhiking and learning ancient esoteric ideas and connecting with intelligences from someplace else. The name Nathan kept echoing in his brain. He found running shoes and a marathon t-shirt from Wisconsin. Had he been to Wisconsin? It was all very bizarre. So, what really happened to Steven Kubacki? Well, to unlock that mystery, we first need to understand what the word Nexilism means. Steven Kubacki was born in Chicopee, Massachusetts on November 8, 1954. His parents, John and Irene Kubacki, lived a lower middle-class lifestyle. His father was employed at a tire factory, and his mother was a secretary at the University of Massachusetts, but they both worked very hard to give Steven the best life that they could. Steven entered this world without being able to feel his mother's love for the first 6 weeks of his life. She had a very severe case of pneumonia and wasn't able to hold him. Until he was 4 years old, he lived with a lazy eye and was finally corrected through surgery. But Steven says that somehow that surgery, well, it brought about an unexpected side effect.
My awareness of other realms, along with my ability to move into other states of consciousness, was heightened from that point on and has continued right up to the present day.
Steven had 3 siblings, 2 brothers and a sister. One of his brothers, Michael, died shortly after birth. Steven remembered spending a lot of time in the hospital as a child with fevers, a double hernia, appendicitis, tonsillitis, pneumonia. And during that time, he said that he would often see his dead baby brother, Michael.
Sometimes when I was alone and in pain, I could see my brother Michael, who had died as an infant. He was always in the company of a dark, shapeless presence. At first, I thought I was simply having bad dreams, but then I stopped seeing Michael and the dark presence came alone.
As Stephen grew older, he began to believe that something dark from another realm had in some way attached itself to him.
By the time I was a teenager, I suspected there was more to what was happening than normal dreams. This wasn't something that was all in my head. I began to see the dark presence as a parasite, something that had been anchored itself to me during the first 6 weeks of my life when my mother had been too ill to hold me.
This dark parasite started out in his dreams, just a horrible nightmare, but eventually, somehow, it began to manifest itself in his waking life.
Nightmares of trauma and horror sometimes lingered into the waking hours, and at times strange visions from other persons' lives came and went like migraines.
So with no other ideas, Stephen turned to books in an attempt to try to figure out exactly what was happening to him. He read all about ghosts, evil spirits, astral projection, and lucid dreaming. He also read how medieval magicians would sometimes trap evil spirits in order to cast them out. One of the books that he read was a fictional story by A.E. Van Vogt. It was titled The Voyage of the Space Beagle. I know, it's an interesting title, but something called Nexilism in that book gave him strength to fight his personal demons. And not long after that, it even sparked within him the feeling of revolution.
In the book, the main character uses his powers of combining and synthesizing multiple fields of knowledge to resolve complex problems and save his spaceship. The power was called Nexilism.
Stephen said that he became a Nexalist that very day. Well, he continued to fight his demons, and as he did, he looked around at the state of the world, and he thought that with his ability to connect with other realms and his growing understanding of Nexilism, maybe he'd have a chance at changing the world. So, on a dreary night in October 1977, he invited his closest friends over, and they hatched a plan.
Long ago, before anyone could remember, a three-headed dragon rose to take control of mankind. One head was called Empire, the other Church, the last coin. Together they formed the pillars of the new civilization that took many names and faces, yet always remained the same. And people were its food.
Stephen explained to his friends that if people were ever going to change the system, they'd have to attack all three heads of the dragon at once, and they would have to do it from within. So they put together this idea. His friend Richard would rise to the very top of politics. Paul would become very prominent in the church. And Walter, well, he would master finance. And the group would work together, and one day they would topple the dragon. So you may be thinking, okay, that's all fine and good, but where does that leave Stephen, right? Well, he would go underground, and he would develop a movement within the people. And then at some point in the future, they would all unite, and they would bring about this immense change. And he felt that in order to do that, he would have to die so that he would be free to work without interference from anyone. So they gathered money, set everything up for Stephen, and then Stephen, he faked his own death.
Yes, I faked my own death in February 1978. At least, that is what I did here. On another plane of existence and in a different reality, I disappeared on that ice. I sometimes have clear flashes of memory of my body going through the frozen water, of floating into the sky, pulled forward by something above me, of being swallowed by a spirit, perhaps the spirit of the lake itself.
Stephen took on a false identity, calling himself Nathan T. Stanfield, and during the 15 months that he was gone, he traveled the world and had some very interesting experiences. At one point, he was training at a dojo in Mexico, and he noticed that many of the instructors there had the same tattoo. Well, in a lucid dream, he discovered that they had all been trying to steal energy from his parallel lives.
We don't have past lives, despite what pop culture tells us about past life regression. Instead, we're living all of our lives simultaneously, and past lives are really just the alternative lives we're drawing from another reality. These instructors sought to draw power from me because they could see these connections in the power that came through them.
At another time, later in Japan, he met a woman who told him that his plan to change the world was destined to fail because he did not have enough compassion in his heart. Well, he struggled with this for a while, and it affected him greatly.
As a result, a dormant strand of what I would later call transdimensional DNA was activated. Transdimensional DNA I hypothesized to be kind of a genetic code that connects us to our alternative histories and timelines in the multiverse.
Stephen had other adventures during this time, and he details them all in his book, The Disappearance, and it is an extremely interesting read. In the book, he talks about other esoteric ideas, his knowledge of other realms and different ways to look at them, and he even connects it all up to modern science. But we are a brand new channel, and we really need to try to keep this video as close as we can to 30 minutes or less, so that the YouTube gods will shine favorably upon us. So, to make a long story short, Stephen finally had a change of heart, and he realized that his plan just wasn't going to work. Eventually, he came back to the United States, and then he found that field near Pittsfield, where he spent quite a bit of time reacclimating himself to the past and changing from Nathan back into Stephen. And then, of course, he got up, found that payphone, and called his aunt. During her research, Amy was able to get an interview with Stephen.
Thank you, Dr. Kubacki, for being on our show. You know, in your book, you talk about a dark mind. When did you first experience that?
My first memory of this dark presence was when we were about to leave Chicopee, Massachusetts, where I was born.
Yeah, you talk about this dark presence and interacting with it and other intelligences, you know, throughout your life. From what, I guess, other realms?
I like to use the multiverse because I like to be more modern. And I think being more modern is more helpful and I think more credible, especially to younger people. So I'm a real proponent for kind of thinking in terms of the multiverse.
So when exactly did you realize that you had a connection with the multiverse?
My connection with the multiverse has kind of been an evolving experience over time. And I've interpreted it in many kind of different ways as I've gotten older.
Okay, so when was the very first time you interacted with one of these beings from the multiverse?
I had a baby brother who died shortly after he was born. I remember seeing him, something like him, visiting. And there was also this sort of dark presence kind of attached that was kind of menacing and scary. And then I remember I had lots of dreams where I would be, it could be a good dream, and I would be then attacked by some kind of dark presence, kind of hard. It was like trying to take me over, suffocate me, take control of my whole being. Kind of early adolescence, I had been reading about lucid dreaming and about how to maybe capture something like this. And so before I went to sleep, I decided I would think of this. And in my sleep, I would wake up, in my sleep, I would then face it and try to conquer it. So I did that and I got it captured. But it was only momentary because it kind of, it was too powerful and it began to escape and I began to panic. And then I woke up and it was still like, even though I was awake, it was still in the room trying to take me over. And I had to crawl off my bed to the door to open the door. Once the light came in, then it disappeared.
So as I recall, up until that point, it was just you who'd seen these entities, right? But then later on, you talk about how a buddy of yours saw them too. So if you'd tell us about that, please.
One evening, we were attacked by this thing. And he saw it, and it was kind of trying to harm him. And at this point, this sounds a little odd. I had a bunch of stuffed animals, and I had tried to, ask the universe and whatever to kind of empower these animals to protect us, like in a circle, and we were protected.
Stuffed animals, you know what? That's great, but I get it. So these entities are from the multiverse, but I also remember you didn't just, experience these things coming to you, right? I think you said that you believe a couple of different times you actually traveled to the multiverse yourself. And in the book, you talked about this experience on Mount Washington. Was that right?
There was a vision of this, like, it's kind of hard to describe, but it was like sort of me, but not me. This guy, man with a kind of a goatee, and he was like pulling levers. And one of the levers was, was I going to go into medical school or not? And, obviously medical school thing wasn't pushed. And there was all this other stuff going on. And it kind of felt afterwards that it felt like I didn't belong back here when I came down. Like somehow I was somewhere else. And I think maybe that was one of the first real kind of experiences of feeling this bifurcation of being in different places, and my thinking I was not where I should be, that I was somewhere else. And I think we are in many places at the same time that we're not aware of. In multiverse theory, it's kind of very popular these days, but it is supported in the mathematics of quantum mechanics that there is this constant bifurcation going on, but most of the time we're unaware of it or don't know how to connect with it.
All right, so that brings me to kind of my big question, and I wrote this one down because I didn't want to forget, I guess, to ask it correctly. The other time that you felt like your consciousness might have split, you called it bifurcation. I understand that your intention was to fake your death and had this plan to create a political revolution. But at the very moment you were supposed to disappear, you got this impression that somewhere else in the multiverse, you really did fall through the ice and die. So tell us about that.
I felt like I almost went under the ice. No, I'm not really sure, but I kind of entered this other dimension, and there was a sense of beings of light and this energy shell. And it took a long time over time to kind of remember a lot of this stuff and kind of what it was about. And maybe I did drown, and then that would lead to another different timeline of some sort. I think that's why there's like multiple sorts of feelings and visions around all that, and one of them is kind of going under, one's going up into space, in the air. There's this various ones, and they probably all kind of happen simultaneously.
Okay, last question. In your book, you allude to the idea that all of us can access the multiverse through like meditation or old rituals or something. So how would one go about that now?
The way I think about ways we can access it now is through kind of the ancient methods by which we do connect with the multiverse, and that's through meditation and prayer and shamanic journeying, ecstatic dancing. There's a whole variety of things that people do, but I think the reason why it works is because when you're like meditating, you're in a sense simplifying or reducing your connections in your mind. And with those reduced connections, you are then opening yourself, especially reduced connections to established repetitive thinking and all the things going, you open yourself to other possibilities in the multiverse.
So this is going to be a really quick DNA. We're already pressed for time. But before we end the show, I wanted to find out what you thought about Dr. Kubacki's story, if it's genuine or not. First, let me tell you what I think. As I'm reading the book, and as you're telling me different parts, I'm thinking, there's lucid dreaming going on, there's imagination, and I'm wondering, is this really the multiverse that he's going through, or is this just kind of in his imagination? So I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I got the opportunity to talk with Dr. Kubacki for quite a while, which was amazing. I found him super intelligent, a very, very thoughtful person. And I really think that he is onto something here with this multiverse. I did find him very genuine. And I have to say, I think there's something to this.
So you think he's telling the truth?
I really do. He seems super genuine.
Yeah, I really liked him. He was really nice. As we were doing this story, it reminded me of the mystery we did with Scott Perry, right? Mm-hmm. How he had this dream, right? So I was thinking about Kubacki's dreams, mm-hmm. and Scott had these dreams over and over, and they led to like this mystery about his life and about, I don't know, what maybe Kubacki would say is something to do with the multiverse. I wouldn't say so, Anyways, if you guys want to see it, we did a complete mystery on it, and it's here.